The studio's air was heavy with anticipation, the kind you could almost hear humming between the cables and microphones. John Lennon adjusted his round glasses, leaning into Yoko Ono's quiet encouragement. This wasn't just another album. This was a conversation, a shared heartbeat. Together, they were creating something raw and reflective, a celebration of love and life after years of turmoil. The world outside was a whirlwind of change. But here in this room, their voices intertwined like old friends finding each other again. By 1980, Lennon had spent 5 years away from the spotlight, retreating into the comforting chaos of family life. He baked bread, watched his young son Sean grow, and explored his identity outside of the Beatlemania bubble. The world, meanwhile, moved forward in disco beats and punk screams, wondering if the man who once sang Imagine had anything left to say. When John and Yoko announced their new album, Double Fantasy, it was as if they'd thrown a pebble into a still pond. The ripples were immediate, and everyone was watching. The album itself was a dialogue, flipping between John's buoyant optimism and Yoko's avant-garde musings. It was a mirror of their partnership, unconventional, unapologetic, yet deeply tender. Tracks like Starting Over and Woman captured Lennon's newfound peace, while Yoko's contributions pushed boundaries, challenging listeners to see the world differently. This wasn't just music. It was a declaration of shared resilience, of two people navigating love in a world that often misunderstood them. And yet, outside the cocoon of creation, life loomed with all its unpredictability. The album was released on November 17, 1980, greeted with both praise and skepticism. Critics debated its merits, but fans clung to the glimpses of John they had missed. For Lennon and Ono, Double Fantasy was more than an album. It was a love letter to each other and to life itself. They were ready to step back into the spotlight, not as icons, but as partners, creating on their own terms. No one could have foreseen what was to come just weeks later, a tragedy that would forever cast Double Fantasy in a bittersweet light. But in that moment, in the fall of 1980, John and Yoko had offered the world a snapshot of their lives, imperfect, bold, and achingly human. It wasn't just an album, it was a testament to the power of art to capture fleeting, beautiful moments before they slip away. The studio lights buzzed faintly as tensions hung heavy in the air. U2, 4 men bound by years of triumphs and trials, found themselves at a crossroads, grappling with a question that could unravel everything. How do you stay relevant when the world you've defined no longer exists? The 80s had crowned them rock royalty, but the new decade loomed with its own demands. Reinvention wasn't a choice, it was survival. The 1980s had been kind to U2, but kindness can breed stagnation. By the dawn of the 90s, the world was changing fast. The Berlin Wall had fallen, grunge was on the rise, and old certainties seemed to crumble like paper in the rain. U2 knew they couldn't cling to their earnest, stadium-sized anthems forever. It was time for something riskier, sharper, something raw. So they packed their bags and headed to Berlin, lured by the ghostly echoes of Bowie and Iggy Pop. But the city, newly liberated, wasn't exactly their muse at first. Instead, creative disagreements erupted, egos clashed, and at one point, the band nearly called it quits. But from the chaos came a spark, a riff, a melody, something strange and seductive. It was One, a song that managed to bridge the gap between who they had been and who they were becoming. Suddenly, the pieces began to fall into place. With producer Brian Eno and engineer Flood guiding their sonic experiments, U2 plunged headfirst into the murky depths of industrial beats, electronic textures, and an unapologetically darker tone. The result was Achtung Baby, an album that married the messy, seductive chaos of a post-Cold War world with a brand new sound. Released on November 18, 1991, Achtung Baby wasn't just a pivot, it was a roar of defiance. From the growling guitar of The Fly to the sultry grooves of Mysterious Ways, the album wasn't afraid to take risks. It mocked its own self-seriousness with a wink and an ironic smirk, shedding the band's messianic image for something far more human and flawed. Critics, who had begun to doubt U2's relevance, were stunned. Fans, too, found themselves pulled into this darkly glittering orbit. In the years since its release, Achtung Baby has been hailed as one of the greatest albums of all time, a testament to U2's refusal to stand still. But its legacy isn't just in the music. It's in the lesson that reinvention often requires walking through fire. And for U2, that fire began in a Berlin studio, amid broken walls, clashing egos, and the unshakable belief that the best was yet to come. The air was charged with something electric. Not a storm, not a protest, but something far more exhilarating: the promise of change. In a London studio, 4 young men sat shoulder to shoulder, their instruments gleaming like polished heirlooms in the dim light. The walls bore witness to their laughter, their relentless creativity, and the occasional bickering over a riff or lyric. It was the kind of scene that seemed almost ordinary in its messiness, yet it held the seed of something extraordinary, a new chapter in music history. The year was 1963, and the world was anything but quiet. Across the Atlantic, President John F. Kennedy was grappling with Cold War tensions. In Britain, the streets hummed with post-war optimism and the clinking of teacups in countless cafes. Youth culture was no longer just a whisper. It was a roaring wave, demanding new heroes, fresh sounds, and a soundtrack for their rebellion and dreams. For 4 lads from Liverpool, John, Paul, George, and Ringo, that wave was the perfect current to ride. Their first album, Please Please Me, had turned heads and lifted spirits. But the Beatles weren't content with being a one-hit wonder. Their second album, With the Beatles, was crafted with intention. Unlike their debut, which had been recorded in a whirlwind, this one was meticulous, layered, and bold. They wanted to show the world that they weren't just a group of boys with guitars. They were artists, carving their names into the heart of modern music. With the Beatles wasn't just an album. It was a statement. Its cover, a stark black-and-white photo with their faces half-shadowed, was a departure from the grinning, polished images that dominated the charts. It whispered confidence, mystery, and a touch of defiance. Inside, the music ranged from upbeat rock and roll to tender ballads, showcasing not just their versatility but their willingness to push boundaries. The timing of the release, November 22, 1963, would etch it into memory for reasons beyond music. That same day, across the ocean in Dallas, Texas, tragedy struck as President Kennedy was assassinated. The contrasting events, one a celebration of creativity, the other a profound loss, highlighted the complexity of the era. Yet, as grief enveloped one part of the world, the Beatles' music offered a glimmer of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, art could unite and heal. with the Beatles became more than an album. It was a cultural touchstone. For the band, it solidified their place not just as performers but as innovators. For their fans, it was a lifeline, a collection of songs that spoke to their yearning, their joy, and their heartbreak. And for the world, it was the unmistakable sign that these four Liverpool lads were more than just a fleeting phenomenon. They were the voice of a generation. On a cold November evening in 1968, four men huddled together in a London studio, their eyes betraying exhaustion, tension, and the spark of genius. The Beatles were no longer the mop-topped lads from Liverpool. The world had seen them grow into musical pioneers, and this time, they weren't just making music, they were redefining it. What emerged from their sessions was not just an album, but a statement. A sprawling, unpredictable collection of 30 tracks, simply titled The Beatles. Fans would come to call it the White Album, its blank cover as enigmatic as the music inside. The journey to this album had been anything but smooth. Earlier that year, the Fab Four had retreated to Rishikesh, India, to study meditation with the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, seeking clarity and creative inspiration. It was meant to be a peaceful escape from the madness of Beatlemania, but even paradise has its cracks. Discontent brewed among the bandmates, and tensions began to rise. By the time they returned to England, they were armed with dozens of songs, some playful, others biting, many deeply personal. Recording sessions for the album turned into a battlefield of egos. John Lennon brought along Yoko Ono, who sat by his side, her presence breaking the unspoken rule of keeping personal lives out of the studio. Paul McCartney's relentless perfectionism clashed with George Harrison's growing frustration at being sidelined. Meanwhile, Ringo Starr felt so overshadowed that he briefly left the band, only to return to the warmth of his drum kit after some much-needed apologies. Yet, amidst the chaos, their creative brilliance shone brighter than ever. Musically, the White Album was unlike anything they or anyone else had attempted before. It leapt across genres, from raw rock to delicate ballads, surreal soundscapes to cheeky parodies. Tracks like Back in the USSR and While My Guitar Gently Weeps revealed a band willing to experiment fearlessly, even if it meant stepping on each other's toes. For fans, the album felt like a treasure chest, scattered, chaotic, but undeniably rich. It mirrored the turbulent spirit of 1968, a year of protests, assassinations, and societal upheaval. When the album finally dropped on November 22, 1968, reactions were as varied as the songs themselves. Critics debated whether its sprawling nature was brilliance or indulgence, while fans dissected every lyric and chord. But one thing was clear. The Beatles had delivered a masterpiece that wasn't meant to be understood all at once. It was messy, it was bold, and it was utterly unforgettable, just like the band themselves. The studio lights buzzed faintly as the band gathered around the mixing desk, four silhouettes bound by a shared mission. It was November 22, 2004, and the world was about to hear How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb, U2's 11th studio album. This wasn't just a collection of songs, it was a labor of love shaped by loss, introspection, and a desire to reconnect with their roots while pushing forward. Bono, The Edge, Adam Clayton, and Larry Mullen Jr. weren't merely making music, they were crafting an experience. The early 2000s were tumultuous times. The scars of 9/11 lingered, wars unfolded in the Middle East, and global conversations about freedom and security intensified. Against this backdrop, U2 once again turned their gaze to the world. Always a band with a finger on the pulse of humanity, they wove these tensions into an album that explored the fragility and strength of the human spirit. At the same time, the record was deeply personal. Themes of love, mortality, and faith were informed by Bono's experience of losing his father, shaping songs that were both intimate and universal. Their creative process was anything but smooth. After the success of their previous album, All That You Can't Leave Behind, the band felt the pressure to deliver something extraordinary. Longtime collaborator Steve Lillywhite returned to the helm, but progress wasn't easy. Songs were written, scrapped, and rewritten as the band wrestled with their vision. Despite moments of doubt, their determination never wavered. What emerged was an album that paired arena-sized anthems with raw emotional depth, filled with soaring guitar riffs, pounding drums, and lyrics that spoke to the soul. The title, How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb, carried weight. It was Bono's way of honoring his late father while reflecting on the need to deconstruct the destructive forces, both personal and global, that weigh us down. Tracks like Sometimes You Can't Make It on Your Own offered a heartfelt tribute to his father, while City of Blinding Lights celebrated youthful wonder and the joy of connection. Meanwhile, songs like Vertigo and All Because of You captured the band's rock roots with a renewed energy that proved they were still at the top of their game. When the album hit the shelves, it was met with both critical and commercial acclaim. Fans embraced its honesty and power, and it went on to win multiple Grammy Awards, including Album of the Year. How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb wasn't just an album. It was a journey through loss, love, and the resilience of the human spirit. In the process, U2 cemented their legacy not only as rock icons, but as storytellers who could bridge the personal and the universal with profound impact. The man with the golden hair sat quietly in a smoky room, his fingers drumming idly on the arm of a weathered chair. The air was heavy with unspoken words, as if the past itself had taken a seat among them. Across the Atlantic, the echoes of their music still reverberated in bedrooms and concert halls. But the band that once shook the world had long since scattered. Led Zeppelin, the legendary rock gods who defined an era, had been silenced. Or so it seemed. The year was 1982, and the world was different now. The swaggering 70s had given way to a slicker, sharper decade. But in the shadows of memory, there were still whispers of epic riffs, soaring vocals, and the thunder of John Bonham's drums. Bonzo, as his bandmates called him, was gone. His death 2 years earlier, marking the end of Led Zeppelin, as they had been. Yet something lingered, a need to honor what had been left unsaid, unwritten, and unplayed. Enter Coda, the 9th and final studio album, a swan song stitched together from the remnants of recording sessions spanning their career. But Coda was more than a collection of leftovers. It was a time capsule, a love letter to the fans who had followed them through the highs of Stairway to Heaven and the depths of tragedy. There were bluesy grooves, experimental beats, and moments of raw power that served as a reminder of why Led Zeppelin was untouchable in their prime. Jimmy Page, the band's enigmatic guitarist and producer, took charge of assembling the album. For him, it wasn't just about filling a contractual obligation, it was a chance to preserve a legacy, to show the world that even their leftovers were worthy of standing alongside rock's greatest works. The title Coda was deliberate. In music, a coda is an ending, a summation, a final flourish. For the band, it was a fitting farewell. Released on November 26, 1982, the album bridged the gap between Led Zeppelin's past and the evolving music scene of the 80s. By then, synthesizers were king, and rock had shifted into sleeker territory. Yet, Coda stood defiantly apart, a glimpse of what had been and a reminder of the sheer, unfiltered energy that only Zeppelin could deliver. And so, while the man with the golden hair put away his guitar and walked into a future unknown, the music stayed behind, defiant and eternal. Coda wasn't just an album. It was a closing chapter in a story that still rings out, louder and prouder than ever, in the hearts of those who dare to dream with guitars in their hands and fire in their souls. The man had been quiet for so long, the world almost forgot what he could say. George Harrison, often overshadowed as the quiet Beatle, stood at a crossroads in 1970, holding songs the world hadn't yet heard but desperately needed. In a world fractured by war, societal shifts, and the crumbling of one of the most beloved bands, I wanna hold your hand, and when I touch you, Harrison was about to unleash something extraordinary. All Things Must Pass wasn't just an album. It was a declaration of independence, a spiritual odyssey, and a reflection of the man who had finally found his voice. The Beatles' breakup wasn't a clean split. It was messy, emotional, and riddled with unfinished business. For George, it was bittersweet. On one hand, he was saying goodbye to a group that had shaped him. On the other, he was free to pursue the songs that had been sidelined for years. I had all this music in me that I couldn't express, he said later. And so George turned frustration into determination, amassing a vault of songs that explored themes of love, pain, spirituality, and renewal. Phil Spector, the enigmatic producer known for his wall of sound, joined George to shape the album's epic scope. But this wasn't just a producer-driven album. George's fingerprints were everywhere, from the intimate acoustic moments to the massive orchestrations. He brought together a dream team of musicians, including Eric Clapton, Billy Preston, and Ringo Starr, who each added their unique touch to the project. Together, they transformed George's personal reflections into universal anthems. One of the album's most iconic songs, My Sweet Lord, was more than a hit. It was a spiritual call to arms. My sweet Lord, my Lord. Combining gospel influences with Hindu mantras, the song bridged cultures and faiths, offering listeners a glimpse into George's spiritual awakening. It was a bold move, blending the sacred and the secular, but it resonated deeply. Yet, even this triumph came with challenges. A lawsuit alleging similarities to the chiffon's He's So Fine cast a shadow over its success, though George handled the controversy with his characteristic humility. The album wasn't just about spirituality, it was also deeply personal. Tracks like Isn't It a Pity and Wah Wah revealed George's pain over strained friendships and creative battles.
Isn't it a pity? Isn't it a shame?
What Is Life offered a burst of hope, its infectious melody underscoring George's ability to balance introspection with optimism. And then there was the title track, All Things Must Pass, a poignant reminder of life's impermanence. Inspired by his time in India and his exploration of Eastern philosophy, the song captured both the sorrow and the beauty of letting go. But the making of the album wasn't without its challenges. Sessions stretched for months, with Spector's elaborate production style occasionally clashing with George's subtler sensibilities. The recording process was chaotic at times, marked by late nights, creative disagreements, and the occasional moment of levity. Amidst the chaos, George emerged as a confident leader, steering the project with a clear vision. His determination paid off, as the album's sprawling scope became a reflection of his expansive inner world. When All Things Must Pass was released in November 1970, it was an instant success. Critics hailed it as a masterpiece, and fans embraced it as a beacon of light in a turbulent time. The triple album format was groundbreaking, signaling George's willingness to defy convention and trust his instincts. Songs like Awaiting on You All and Beware of Darkness offered a mix of warning and encouragement, urging listeners to seek higher truths amidst worldly distractions. It was clear that George was no longer the quiet Beatle. He was a force to be reckoned with. 50 years later, Harrison's magnum opus received a loving revival with the release of the 50th anniversary remaster. The updated mix brought out new layers in the production, allowing George's voice and lyrics to shine with even more clarity. Fans were treated to unreleased demos, alternate takes, and a renewed sense of intimacy with the music. A new music video for My Sweet Lord, directed by Lance Bangs, delighted audiences with its playful yet profound depiction of a quest for enlightenment. Featuring cameos by Mark Hamill, Fred Armisen, and other celebrities, the video bridged generations, reintroducing Harrison's message of spiritual and universal love to a modern audience. Over time, the album's legacy has only grown. Its themes of spirituality, resilience, and self-discovery remain timeless, resonating with new generations of listeners. For George, the album was more than a creative triumph. It was a catharsis. It marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where he was free to explore music and life on his terms. It's always about finding that peace, he reflected years later, whether it's through music, meditation, or just letting go. And that's what All Things Must Pass ultimately is: a journey to peace. In a world that often feels loud and overwhelming, George Harrison's All Things Must Pass stands as a reminder of the power of quiet introspection and bold self-expression. It's not just an album. It's an experience, an invitation to look inward and upward. And as the title suggests, it's a gentle reminder that no matter how heavy life feels, everything, even the hardest moments, must eventually pass.